Greetings to you all. Greetings to all our viewers across the world, especially in the region and in Zimbabwe, of course. Tonight, we are looking at South Africa's mediation in Zimbabwe's crisis. What should be the outcome? For purposes of recording with the SADC, we are going to have the first half an hour with SADC, during which I will introduce each of the panelists and discussants, and for each to give a 3-minute summary around the topic for tonight. So to begin with, the context, whatever the denials about a crisis on the part of ZANU-PF and the government in Harare, it is now accepted that there is a crisis. And the insistence that there's no crisis exposes both the vulnerability of a government under siege and shows that perhaps we have not reached a stage where that is become self-evident to those in power. And notwithstanding the apparent backtracking on the part of the South African government and the ANC, we know that engagement has taken place between the two governments and that both the region and the AU are alive to the issues. We also know that currently the new president of Malawi is visiting Zimbabwe as part of his tour of SADC states as the new chair of SADC. And we are hoping that Malawi too will join the international chorus for mediation in the Zimbabwe crisis. Both the character and outcome of whatever it is that can be described as intervention or mediation in Zimbabwe, these will depend on the following. First and foremost, on the national question, i.e., to what extent has the state begun to acknowledge, as Paulo Jordan said last week during a similar conversation as we're having tonight, that the house is indeed on fire? Does the situation have to worsen, including more bloodshed, abductions, atrocities on the part of a government under siege and able to rule only through brute force before it can be said that the conditions for roundtable talks are conducive? Thirdly, has the national dialogue process really progressed beyond intentions and the various donor-funded initiatives that now constitute what we call the national dialogue industry in Zimbabwe? And on the part of South Africa, SADC and the AU, at what stage will South Africa's initiative go multilateral to include SADC and the AU, and even BRICS, of which South Africa is a member? And what scaffolding can we expect from the international community as a whole, including the UN Security Council? Above all, what is it that we want to see emerge from such mediation? Certainly an end, first and foremost, to the human rights abuses, abductions, torture, a return to constitutionalism and the rule of law, including the return of the military to the barracks, economic recovery program, and address the diaspora question, which, as we saw in the previous conversation, the millions of Zimbabweans out there, 75% of all professional and skilled Zimbabweans are out there. So to help us unpack all this, we have a panel of very experienced political analysts, political activists, attendant to the region's problems. First and foremost, Toza Botha, an ANC stalwart, one who has been in the trenches as part of the struggle against apartheid. When we knew him here in Zimbabwe, in Zambia. Welcome, Toza. Regrettably, Paul Mangwana is not able to join us. He has not been cleared by his party to participate in this particular dialogue. He has been here before. Thirdly, Tendai Biti, who needs no introduction, least of all to this forum, this platform. Tendai is almost an indispensable figure in our politics in Zimbabwe. Elina Susulu, also a regular on this forum, a very eloquent advocate for human rights in the region, who has pushed us over and over again to attend to this very issue on the Zimbabwe question. Eleanor is also my niece. Then Moletsi Mbeki, my old brother Moletsi, political analyst, author, entrepreneur, and most pleased that we have him here for what will no doubt be a refreshing intervention. Johnny Carson is late, he might be late joining us because he's at another meeting, but Johnny Carson is former Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs and the former ambassador, US ambassador to Kenya, Uganda, and Zimbabwe. Last but not least, a former student of mine, a bright student, now professor of sociology in Botswana, Onalina Selowani, who's also a member of the Board of Trustees of the Subwest Trust. So we'll begin with Toza, both. Your 3 minutes, please, Toza.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, carry on, Toza.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Saying, let me...
Just 3 minutes of your summary of what you have to say later on.
Yeah. Let me make a disclaimer that I'm not representing any particular political or structure. I represent myself. The views I express are my personal views. First of all, on this topic of the day, it's important to say that the first step to solve a problem is to acknowledge that there is a problem. If you don't acknowledge that there is a problem, there is no need to bring in mediators or discuss solution of a problem. Both South Africa and Zimbabwe are faced with economic challenges, declining or declined economies, high levels of unemployment, declining state investment in manufacturing and infrastructure sectors, declining quality of services in the economy and health sectors in the education, and the growing corruption at the level of the ruling elites in both countries. Both countries are faced with the challenges at the post-colonial legacy of land settlements. I think South Africa should have or must have learned something from Zimbabwe. What I'm not sure is whether they have perfected how to deal with that, because Zimbabwe is now reversing some of the earlier decisions it took in trying to grab land without compensation. One cannot talk of mediation unless there is a problem or disagreement between two or more parties, or between the state and its citizens. Secondly, mediation presupposes that the parties in disagreement are failing or have failed to resolve their problems on their own. A mediator intervenes because either the parties to conflict invite the external mediator, or the external mediator is impacted by the disagreements or the crisis that is happening between those parties, which I think is the case right now. South Africa as a country is impacted by the problems of Zimbabwe because many Zimbabweans have crossed the borders to seek refuge or employment in South Africa. The problem is that South Africa itself is faced with its own crisis of unemployment, a declining economy, and a flight of its own capital, rather intellectual capital, to other countries. So there is a crisis in both countries, but to different degrees. The question is, does Zimbabwe acknowledge or accept that it has a problem? In terms of our own observation, is that Zimbabwe does not seem to want to agree that there is a problem. Therefore, it's not looking for a mediator. But there's two levels of intervention that are required here. There's the party-to-party mediation or relationship between ZANU-PF and ANC. But there's also the need for the state-to-state relationship. If we talk about party-to-party, what is called rejection of ANC offer in Zimbabwe was based on the fact that these were not fraternal party relations, because ANC went there to see that it can meet all other political parties, including civil society. ZANU-PF was expecting that these are fraternal relations, you will meet only with us and go back home. On the state-to-state relations issue, obviously the ANC was expected, not the ANC government, was expected to meet with the state because it is faced with the problem of refugees, or we don't call that, but citizens of Zimbabwe crossing the borders, our porous borders, seeking employment in South Africa, and South Africans beginning to say Zimbabweans are taking our jobs, and therefore we want them back home. Neither of these offers are a solution, because even if Zimbabweans go back home, it will not resolve the problem of unemployment and economic crisis in South Africa. The figures of Zimbabweans working in South Africa, not living, but working in South Africa, is relatively small compared to the ratio of South Africans who are unemployed because of the collapse of the economy. For that reason, I think that we have to deal with the issue of, is Zimbabwe ready to accept that it needs intervention? Are the regional organizations like SADC and AU prepared to intervene in this situation, acknowledging that there is a problem? Unless these countries, or rather these organizations, accept that there's a crisis and stop the friendship that is based on the politics of liberation, to now accept that we are dealing state by state, state-to-state basis, and therefore the citizens of these countries are suffering.
Okay, Tozi, we'll just stop there. Yeah. We'll come back to you. Tendai Biti, your 3 minutes, please. Tendai.
Well, thank you, and good evening. I think that the starting point is to answer the question on the direction of South African mediation in Zimbabwe. One must interrogate why dialogue is necessary in Zimbabwe. And to answer that question, one must locate where Zimbabwe is. Where is Zimbabwe right now? And more importantly, why are we here? And therefore, why is a dialogue necessary? The short answers to both three postulations is that Zimbabwe is in a deep-seated structural crisis. Underpinning this crisis is, of course, the complete securitization of the state, the complete, if you like, juntarization of the state, takeover of the state by the military. Something that was accentuated, something that is now more blatant after the coup in November of 2017. One would have thought that the election of July of 2018 would mitigate the crisis of legitimacy created by the constitutional assault brought by the coup in 2017. But on the contrary, the 2018 election accentuated the crisis of legitimacy and the military takeover of our country. So that's number one, the democratic deficit, the democratic deficiency. But associated with the democratic deficiency is the performance deficiency, the lack of output legitimacy on the part of Emmerson Mnangagwa and his government and his cronies. The economic crisis is huge and deep. Zimbabwe, for all intents and purposes, is in a recession that is fast-tracking itself into an economic depression. As I said the other day, you have got a ruling elite and a ruling class without ruling ideas. An elite that has totally mismanaged the country's economy, the country's monetary policy, the country's exchange rate. Unemployment is 95%, 79% of our people are living in extreme poverty, surviving on less than US 35 cents a day. There's the delivery system. Only today they announced a strange unconstitutional decree that all medical doctors will be conscripted into the army, ostensibly to stop strikes by doctors. 8 million of Zimbabweans are food vulnerable. So it's a total breakfast, dog's breakfast, but one which not many dogs would touch by a long mile. So the combination of a democratic deficit and a performance deficit creates a huge crisis, creates huge uncertainty. But Zimbabwe is 40 years of age. So you have a problem of a liberation movement that has run, or more appropriately, misrun our country for 40 years, brought it down to its knees, and has survived and pushed Zimbabwe purely on the basis of coercion, fear, and capture. That has been its instruments of regime retention. But the citizen is angry. The citizen is upset. The citizen wants to reclaim its space. In other words, the citizen is crying out for a transition, because what we have seen is a case of decayed transition, arrested a transition. Inside the state itself, the cockpit is unstable. The president and the vice president can hardly talk to each other. The factions inside the ruling party and the tension inside the ruling party is so thick you can cut it with a hacksaw. So given this instability, you need to create a soft landing for Zimbabwe to avoid an implosion that can come in the form of another military coup. And the military coup is not an academic postulation in Zimbabwe. Those of us who study Africa know that coups are like London. You wait for one for 4 hours, then two come in a row, or an implosion in the form of the military, trigger-happy military shooting people in Harare and in the streets of Harare. So you need dialogue to a soft.
I'll come back to you. Eleanor, please. Eleanor.
Yeah.
Eleanor.
Yes, sorry, I needed to be unmuted by the host. Okay, I won't say much because as a discussant, really, I have to respond to what people are going to say. I do want to mention, I think the key question for South Africa, I'll repeat what Mavuso Msimang said in an article earlier this week, that ultimately what options are available for the Republic of South Africa to safeguard its interests that are potentially in jeopardy as a consequence of the non-resolution of the Zimbabwe crisis. So from a South African point of view of self-interest, what should it do? And when you look at that self-interest, I think there's two areas. There's the area of migrants, the huge influx of migrants into South Africa, and the xenophobic threats from within South Africa. And then the second area, which nobody has really looked at in terms of South African Zimbabwean cooperation, is the issue of the pandemic and the way in which the medical fraternity in Zimbabwe is treated. I think that is a very unthought about area of intervention. So I'd probably try and go into that a little further.
Thanks, Eleanor. Thank you. Moletsi?
Okay, am I unmuted now?
Yes, we can hear you, Moletsi. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you. First, I think we have to recognize that Zimbabwe has a bad government, and it has had a bad government for a very long time. I lived in Zimbabwe in the 1980s, and I was there when there was the mistreatment of the people in Matabeleland and in the Midlands. And since the formation of MDC, we have seen the abuse and mistreated by the Zimbabwe, the ZANU-PF government of the voters and supporters of MDC and other opposition. So Zimbabwe has a bad government. That is the starting point. The second thing is that the governments of the region, many of them secretly support the bad government. When a commercial farmer in Zimbabwe went to complain to the SADC tribunal about his farm being confiscated, not only was the farmer killed by the ZANU-PF government, but the SADC heads of state dissolved the forum of the SADC tribunal, so that there are no more Zimbabweans who would have to go to SADC tribunal and complain against their government. So myself, I don't see mediation either by the South African government or the SADC government as being a solution to the challenges that Zimbabweans are faced with, that the people of Zimbabweans are faced with. I see the people of Southern Africa as being the allies of the people of Zimbabwe. A lot gets said about how many Zimbabweans are living in South Africa. The reality is that they are living amongst us South Africans, and we are the hosts of the Zimbabweans in South Africa. We are not their enemies. So they have ready-made allies amongst the people of South Africa, amongst the people of Botswana, the people of Zambia, Mozambique, and so on. So we, the ordinary people of Southern Africa, are the allies of the people of Zimbabwe to find a solution to getting rid of the bad government of ZANU-PF. Now, we have experience as South Africans. We had hundreds of years of a bad government, not 30 years or 40 years. We had hundreds of years, 350 years to be exact. How did we manage to get rid of this bad government? By the people of the world who supported us. We made our own sacrifices, yes, to fight against this regime, but the people of Africa and the people of the world supported us. It wasn't mediation by anyone. It was the people who supported us. The people of Zimbabwe supported us. The people of Nigeria supported us. The people of the United States supported us. The Soviet Union, but we, the South Africans, went to them and said, this is our problem. This is the action we would like you to take to help us solve our problem. Now, we have a huge community of Zimbabweans in South Africa. My suggestion is, instead of us spending too much energy on mediation by governments who we know will produce no result, I think the community of Zimbabweans should start talking to South Africans as to what is the problem in Zimbabwe and what do they want us, the citizens of South Africa, to do to contribute to help them solve the problem that they are faced with in Zimbabwe.
Thanks, we'll come back to you. Annalena? Annalena?
Am I unmuted?
I can hear you, yes.
All right.
Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, and hello to everybody. I am the missing link in that I've been invited here so many times to this virtual forum, and this is the first time I'm actually showing up, thanks to Ibo's persistence. Taking off from basically where Moeletsi ended, he's raised very, very important issues here, and I want to broaden the discourse a little bit, taking from him. That sometimes we look at the specifics of national problems as if they are actually unique to the national boundaries of one country. But if we put the question on its head and basically say, now, who are these mediators supposed to be coming from? Whether it's South Africa or SADC, African Union, same difference. Can we trust any of these governments actually to play any mediatory role when they themselves have issues to answer to? To what extent are our governments actually a representative of the citizens that they are supposed to govern? Very few of our African countries would actually would actually pass the test of being, in fact, governments of the people, by the people. We have a very, very serious problem with the problems that you have pronounced as a characteristic of Zimbabwe and South Africa are in fact characteristics of the whole of Southern Africa, really, and possibly the whole of the continent. Corruption has been on the rise. State capture has been on the rise. So these are matters of degree rather than that there is any significant difference between, for instance, Botswana and Zimbabwe and South Africa or Namibia. These are matters of degrees. And it basically means that the citizens are largely excluded from the discourse. That is why mediation is such an easy option. You go and talk to your own brother who happens to have the same values as you, that, they must stay in power. And then when they are there, they mustn't be easily disturbed.
Okay, Olena, we'll come back to you. You seem to have a problem there. Right, let's go back now. Get back to you, Tozi. Tozi, can I get back to you? Tozi? Yes, can I get back to you? I'd like to ask you a few questions, Tozi. Are you unmuted?
Yes, I am now.
I can hear you. Is there mediation taking place at all? What's your understanding of the situation between Zimbabwe and South Africa, or rather between South Africa and Zimbabwe? Is there mediation taking place?
Well, there is an attempt, but my point is that you can't have mediation where there is no admission of a crisis. South Africa is sending, there have been 2 delegations sent to Zimbabwe, one of the state to state relations level, and the other, the attempted party-to-party meeting. I think neither of these have succeeded, and therefore I can't say that there has been mediation. And in fact, if the Zimbabwean government is in denial that there is a crisis needing to be resolved, what are you going to mediate, and who are you going to mediate between, and who? The MDC has been excluded from any discussions with the ANC or meeting with the ANC. Civil society organizations have been prevented from meeting with the ANC, and the ZANU-PF has insisted you only meet, ANC meet only with ZANU-PF, and that's all. And at the level of the state, what are you going to discuss? If you're going to discuss the crisis of the economy, then you've got to address the sources of that crisis. And if Zimbabwe does not admit that it has created part of that crisis through the land appropriation, through running the economy, through corruption and all of that, what then are you going to mediate, and who are you going to mediate?
Yeah, but in your view, don't you think there was a substantive discussions? You had a whole day between the ANC and ZANU-PF in Harare, and there was a communique issued. We also have been able to glean from witnesses to the dialogue that took place that there were substantial issues discussed, from the issue of the human rights abuses to the threat of ICC over the violence that has taken place over the last 20 years, to an insistence that there's need to attend to the conditions which have led to many Zimbabweans trekking across the Limpopo. So one would argue that the engagement has already started. What the question would be rather, where would this mediation lead to, or this intervention or engagement? Do you think that South Africa, as Eleanor, or certainly more or less Mbeki and Onelina Selwane have been very strong, that perhaps none of the governments in the region, least of all South Africa, has a capacity to be mediator in the Zimbabwean crisis? Do you think that it'd be better to get a mediator from outside the region, Tozi?
The question is whether the ANC or the South African government has any moral authority to mediate, given that it has its own challenges. I mean, the question of, if we talk the economy, the issue of corruption, the issue of the economy having been run down to its knees, the challenges that the ANC government is facing in terms of the land restitution or appropriation without compensation, these are all challenges that Zimbabwe has gone through these, and it has learned the hard way that some of these decisions were wrong. Now, the ANC is going that route also. Now, that's point number one. Number two, the state corruption, the siphoning of state funds by the ruling elite within South Africa. Now, how are you going to advise Zimbabwe to get out of that situation when, in fact, you are getting deeper into it? So for me, I'm saying, what are you going to mediate? First of all, you've got to accept and admit that there is a crisis, and who is responsible for the crisis. If you are creating a dialogue between two parties, there has to be some respect that there's a moral ground within which we've got to deal with these issues. As I'm saying, for me, there is a difficult situation because the Zimbabwean government on the party itself will ask the ANC, what moral authority do you have to tell us what to do? When
there's one area which you seem to be overlooking, and Tendai Biti raised it, and Eleanor has raised it many times on this platform. The issue of human rights abuses, abductions, right? The presence of the military in everyday life of the country. There's no other country in the region in which there's virtual military rule as there is in Zimbabwe. And I would argue that these two issues, human rights abuses, which have become very, very blatant in our region, in our country rather, because of this is a state on siege. As Tendai Biti has just said, it's a state which rules by sheer force. Surely it's in the issue about which all countries in the region have a moral authority to call Zimbabwe to order. And secondly, the military, which regrettably SADC generally and South Africa in particular, blessed a coup. So we have a reality of military rule in Zimbabwe. Therefore, return to constitutionalism is one about which all the region as a whole has a moral authority to demand. And I would argue that these are the two key issues that would be on the table when it came to any mediation whatsoever, whether through South Africa or any other. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, you see, I would agree. I would agree to the extent that if you look at the peer review initiative that was set up over a decade ago, it was supposed to review exactly, in my view, some of these security issues and how the citizens are treated and so forth. But there hasn't been honesty on the part of the regional countries that are supposed to review one another. The reality is that South Africa and Zimbabwe are close neighbors. And there has been what you call silent diplomacy between Zimbabwe and South Africa, or South African silent diplomacy against Zimbabwe. Now, the question you've got to ask is, why now? Why is South Africa decided to intervene at this stage on these issues? Because these issues have been going on for a very long time.
Maybe we should ask Tendai Biti to come in here. Why do you think South Africa has found it rather urgent to come in as they have twice now? Tendai Biti?
No, thank you. Yeah, so firstly, I think that we mustn't underestimate the fact that this regime is not ready for dialogue. For dialogue to take place, there must be an acknowledgement. There must be an acknowledgement of the fact that the status quo is not working. Number two, there must be the existence of a mutual self-hating status quo. It's not there in Zimbabwe at the present moment. The regime, Emerson's regime, doesn't feel sufficiently incentivized as to demand dialogue. It doesn't feel that its back is against the war to the extent that it sees a salvation in dialogue. President Mugabe felt it in 2008 with the violence, the isolation, the economic meltdown, inflation of 500 billion%. So he knew there was an alternative, and he knew and craved for dialogue. He literally pushed us into dialogue after the stolen election of 30 June 2008. Emerson doesn't feel that. He actually mistakenly thinks there's no crisis. He actually mistakenly thinks that the economy is on the mend, they're rigging the exchange rate and so forth. Thirdly, to have dialogue, you actually require leadership. Leadership with a vision, leadership that understands how deep and structural the crisis is, and a leadership that will put its citizens first. Emerson and ZANU will not put Zimbabwe first. They are driven by two agendas. Number one, the power retention agenda, the regime survival agenda. Number two, their bottom line. Zimbabwe is going through massive, unprecedented, corruption. They are stealing billions and billions of dollars since 2017. So there's no incentive, there's no desire, there is no leadership that understands the imperative of dialogue in Zimbabwe. Now, to answer your question specifically, South Africa, to South Africans, Zimbabwe is not a foreign policy, issue. South Africa lives with the mess of Zimbabwe's misgovernance and bad governance. The fingerprints and footprints of Zimbabwe's terrible rule, terrible misrule, are there for everyone to see in South Africa. Go to your restaurants, go to your hospitals, go to your police stations, you see the fingerprints of state failure, collapse, and vulnerability of Zimbabwe. So we are not a foreign policy issue to South Africans. Therefore, it's in South Africa's own selfish interest to resolve the Zimbabwean crisis, to drive the resolution of the Zimbabwean crisis. The South African economy is limping, growth rates of less than 1.5%. The South African economy right now is in its worst state in 45 years. And I would submit, and there's data to show that part of the problem is that you are carrying a premium, you are carrying Zimbabwe, you are literally subsidizing of Zimbabwe. You are literally subsidizing the Zimbabwean crisis. So there's a selfish motive, and Comrade Deleno addressed this. There's a selfish motive that why South Africa should intervene. And there are two other factors that are key.
I'll come back to you, Tendai. Moletsi, what's your take on that? What Tendai just said, Moletsi.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to unmute myself. Thank you. I think you can hear me now.
Yes.
Well, what I can say to Tendai is that personally, I'm very suspicious of what the intentions of the South African government are. I know that the South African government, during the last 20 years, one of its major priorities in connection with Zimbabwe was to make sure that a trade union inspired party like MDC does not win the election and become the government of Zimbabwe. The ANC was opposed to MMD in Zambia and was opposed to MDC in Zimbabwe. And as you can see, they keep talking about this liberation movement. So the ANC is opposed to the new movements that are emerging in the Southern Africa region. They want the old nationalist movements to stay in power for as long as they can. So I will be very, very weary to accept at face value the good intentions of the South African government in its involvement in Zimbabwe. Secondly, the South African government has never said what are South Africa's national interests that are threatened by what is happening in Zimbabwe. They have never said that. Now, the fact that they don't go to the population and say, these are our national interests that are being threatened by what is happening in Zimbabwe shows that actually they don't want us, the population of South Africa, the people of South Africa, to be involved on the side of the people of Zimbabwe and their civil society organizations. They want us to not to be informed. And as I say, you will never hear the South African government explaining to us what interests of South Africa are threatened or are being undermined by what the ZANU-PF government is doing in Zimbabwe. So I'm very weary of the initiative, and I think you have to be very cautious. You have to be very careful not to extrapolate what you think, what you yourself think the South African government should be thinking with what the South African government actually is thinking. South African government does not see the migration to South Africa. It values ZANU-PF staying in power, and it would rather pay the cost of the migration to South Africa as long as ZANU-PF stays in power and a civil society-based political party like MDC is kept out of power.
Well, Tendai, I will come back to you, Tendai. And there's been a lot of talk about the kind of aborted mediation, aborted intervention on the part of the ANC and the South African government. Have there been any contacts between the ANC or the government of South Africa and the MDC alliance, directly or indirectly, in the last few months? I say so because basically I've always wondered what is it that the ANC or the South African government want to know about Zimbabwe, which they don't know already, through the statements that the MDC Alliance, people like yourself in particular, almost weekly, have made, placed in the public domain about the condition of the economy, about the human rights situation? Have there been any contacts, my question, any contacts between the ANC and its government and the MDC Alliance and civic society in general, in your knowledge?
At a formal level, no. At a formal level, no. But you must know that we've worked with comrades in the ANC for a long time. Comrades like Lindiwe Zulu, the former Secretary General Gwede Mandashe, now the chairperson, comrades like Vanessa Govenda, comrades like Sidney Mfumadi, Charles Ngakula, during the previous Mark Maharaji during the previous efforts. So we have links. And we are in dialogue at informal platforms all the time. So that's not the issue. But at a formal level, no. But I just want to want to make 2 points. I hear a comrade Moletsi on his cynical views, if I might, for lack of a better word, on South Africa's motive. I don't dispute that, but I also want to say that during his brother's tenure, during President Mbeki's tenure, there was a genuine desire to see resolution of the Zimbabwean crisis. The only difference, and he is right to say that they are afraid, the ANC has always been afraid of a labor-based movement. The solution proposed was one that chose stability over democracy, but there was a genuine attempt to resolve the Zimbabwean crisis, and one that is born out of the objective self-interest, the objective realization that the Zimbabwean crisis is not a foreign policy issue for South Africa. And one of the things that I want to raise, which is a threat to the region, is that the coup in November 2017 was a game changer. It was a seamless coup, and every general in the region has been studying that coup. The South African generals, including that. So in the Zimbabwean coup is not the coup in Lesotho, it's not the coup in Madagascar. So all these countries in the region would want to coup-proof themselves against the importation of another coup in the region through Zimbabwe. That means that resolution of the Zimbabwean crisis, whether by a solution that favors stability over democracy, or as some of us argue, a genuine solution that recognizes that only the true interests and desires of the people of Zimbabwe matter, is what is critical. So South African intervention is as long overdue as it is necessary. The only thing that I want to say is that the South Africans should not be naive. President Ramaphosa should not be naive. This regime is a rogue regime, a securocratic regime. So South Africa needs to hide behind international law. South Africa needs to hide behind the resolution of SADC, as President Mbeki did in 2007. Faced with the Zimbabwean crisis, President Mbeki forced the calling of an extraordinary summit on SADC, which was held in Dar es Salaam on the 29th of March 2007. So President Mbeki needs to hide behind the regionalism, the Southern African Development Community, or the African Union, which he currently chairs. If he tries to force a bilateral attempt, he'll be faced with the answers that his two delegations have made, the party delegation and the government delegation. President Ramaphosa needs to be streetwise and understand that you are really dealing with the rogue elements. We have been in this game for a long time. They don't require kids' gloves. They require a toughness. And I'm not sure at this present stage he's aware of the humongousness of the crisis and the humongousness of the regime, the deception of Emerson, the deception of ZANU-PF, and how they are past masters of playing the game of deception, delay, and deceit.
Thanks, Tendai. Eleanor, do you see the possibility of mediation through South Africa or through whoever in the current global situation? Or do you share the views that Tendai and Moletsi have, from a different perspective, offered us here?
Well, I'm cynical about mediation because it didn't work in the past. And I think I would take issue with Tendai's sort of romantic view of Thabo Mbeki's genuine. Thabo Mbeki wanted to keep ZANU-PF in power with an accommodation of Mugabe and bring the MDC into the fold. And I would argue that that mediation that resulted in the government of national unity was a disaster for Zimbabwe. And rather than resolving the crisis, it deepened it. When the democratic forces were at the point of actually almost achieving victory, ZANU-PF and the Mugabe regime were given a lifeline that enabled them that in 2020, we're still talking about this. So I really don't have a romantic view at all. In fact, my view of the Mbeki mediation was that it was really a disaster for Zimbabwe. And further mediation could be, so if political, for example, the MDC puts its eggs in that mediation basket, there will be a problem. And I think we need to go back to history. There was a meeting, I think it was in 2007, when regional civil society from across the continent assembled in Nairobi and made a set of demands on Zimbabwe. And I think that was the only time when African regional society got together and there was complete consensus about what should be demanded regarding Zimbabwe, with human rights at the top and a number of demands. And I think we should dig up what was said there so that regional civil society, and I agree with Moletsi, I think South African government is more receptive, not completely, but certainly more receptive to what its own civil society says and does. And it can be pressured, it is open to pressure by its own civil society. I'll give a very specific example. When Justina Mukoko was kidnapped, was abducted, what's the word, abducted, yes. It was pressure from women's organizations, and ANC women took it up, and that was part of the pressure which helped ensure that Justina was not killed and that she was released alive. And I think we mustn't underestimate regional civil society getting together and making demands, and those demands based on our self-interest anyway. I agree with Odalena when she says these countries, it's a difference of degree rather than kind. I mean, the SADC region is not a good democratic neighborhood. And I think for regional citizens, the awareness and the consciousness that police brutality in Zimbabwe opens themselves up to police brutality in their own countries. You know, I must commend Tendai Biti for his ability to coin new English phrases. It's the first time I've heard of coup-proofing themselves. By country coup-proofing themselves. So it's another BTism which we can enjoy. I think for us to proof ourselves against brutality, police brutality in our own countries, we need regionally to mobilize against police brutality in Zimbabwe. And those same demands around the way police should conduct themselves should be, especially at this moment when police brutality is a focus, international focus, as a result of what's going on in the US. I think this is a moment for the regional civil society. In South Africa, regional civil society should be pressuring the South African government to demand around human rights, to involve migrants in South Africa in the conversation because they are directly affected, and to actually look at this issue of a pandemic. This is one intervention which South Africa can make. The treatment of the medical establishment in Zimbabwe at this moment during this pandemic, that should certainly be something that civil society here and the doctors here, the South African Medical Association, has intervened around issues and put pressure on the government, South African government, to do certain things and make demands. And I think civil society, really, we need to get our act together. We need to agree on a set of demands, and we need to put it into the government, on the governments in the region. In the similar way as you had the Harare Declaration, which I think it was 1987, around South Africa, which really helped move a consensus around demands that were made on the South African government and mobilize the international community. So a similar kind of declaration where there is consensus around a set of issues, I think is the way going forward.
But wouldn't you acknowledge the fact that it was precisely the kind of things you're talking about, the role of the media, including SABC and the ENCA, Daily Maverick, and all these media houses, the kind of reportage on Zimbabwe in the period leading to 31st of July, isn't that what has led South Africa to be seen to be doing what it's doing? Wouldn't you agree?
Yes,
I agree with you that, yeah, yes.
Yeah, I certainly agree, and I think that is what must be stepped up. And if we had a consensus on what we are demanding, you see that reporting was made, but I think there needs to be a coherent set of demands that we say, we want you to demand this of the South African government. Really a declaration, I think that would, and that is repeated, and increased highlighting of the human rights abuses, I think is what is very necessary.
Yes. Yeah. Onolina, do you believe that, notwithstanding your very cynical remarks about the capacity of governments who have no moral authority, you don't see a way that the SADC as a region could be pushed under the guidance of South Africa, of course, but also with the new kid on the block, Malawi, which is now the new chair of SADC, not only to be able to put Zimbabwe on the agenda again. Do you think there's a possibility, Onolina?
Ibu, as long as, it's the governments that are involved, I really don't put great faith in what governments can actually achieve on their own, because, they have certain protocols. Nobody wants to be accused of wanting to overthrow the government next door. They would rather keep the guy that they're used to in power, rather than actually facilitate a democratic change of governance of government. That's number one. I buy into Eleanor's argument about the role of civil society. We are not taking any initiative, and unfortunately, in South Africa and Zimbabwe, during the prolonged struggle against settler colonialism, they built up links that they consistently utilize as shared experience. And other shared experiences are undermined and are not utilized to the full. How many Zimbabweans, for instance, of great repute, representing the organizations that speak for labor, that speak for women, actually ever try to engage with organizations in Botswana? And yet Zimbabweans were here in very, very large numbers. Did we not forge links that could be built upon? As long as there is that disjuncture between what governments are doing and what the liberation struggles forged in terms of political organizations that were fighting to end, as long as the dialogue is at that level, it excludes the majority of citizens who ought to be concerned. And let us also face it, some of those citizens are happy to see the crisis continuing in Zimbabwe because they benefit. In Botswana, we benefit greatly, to be very, very honest, from Zimbabweans actually being able to come here and add value that our educational system has failed to add among its citizens. But dialogue across various interest groups, so that people actually see that as long as there is a problem of human rights abuses that we close our eyes to and occasionally mentioned as at dinner talk tables, and the presence of military as if this is an entertainment, we're watching soap operas. As long as people see that as something distant that affects the Zimbabweans across the border and has nothing to do with their own security here in Botswana long term, then we have a problem, Ibu. We have a problem that we do not dialogue enough across various interest groups to highlight the danger of this segmentation, where national politics, we are the most segmented continent in the world. And yet, we love our borders so much that we become immune to the problems that are undermining us without us paying attention, because these are problems for people across the border. For me, mediation on its own, without actually underlying and undergirding dialogues, citizen to citizen, is a non-starter. People will agree. Tomorrow it's somebody else is not Mnangagwa. The change of office doesn't change the fundamentals of issues that ought to be discussed, and very, very openly, dialogue with citizens as well as dialogues among our governments. I don't hold great hope of government solving these problems, because sometimes they get involved so that they don't have to deal with similar problems brewing within their own national borders. I would like to see a greater bit of dialogue among citizens.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to ask for questions and comments from our viewers and participants on this forum. But just want to remind ourselves that the mediation we're talking about is mediation in the face of a very unusual set of circumstances in Zimbabwe. Namely, the increasing violence, abductions in the country, the dire economic situation, which is probably the worst in the region, and above all, the what Tendai called the democracy deficit, the absence of constitutionalism, the visible and active role of the military in a manner that's unknown in other parts of the region. These and therefore the call for a comprehensive national settlement, some kind of settlement within which Zimbabwe can return to constitutional rule, return and begin building, recovering the economy, and reconstructing a broken country. That is really the purpose about which we're having this dialogue. So any hands? There's Jessica. Jessica can come in. Jessica.
Yes. Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. So I have a question.
Who's Jessica? Jessica who?
Jessica Maturere. I'm just participating, yes. So I have a question. When ANC came to Zimbabwe, right? They came in the capacity of a party, but who did not have been better if they had if SADC had sent in envoys, so that at least it's more on a regional level than more on a party level. At least I feel in that sense, there would have been some form of, sense of urgency, because this now feels like, it was just party-to-party business. So that's the first question. Then my second question is, when ANC says they tried, okay, they came to Zimbabwe and they tried their level best, how did they try? Because my understanding is, yes, of course, the president and whomever they met might actually be saying that there is no crisis. But then if they were genuinely here to inquire, would it not have been better to press the fact that they should have met churches and all? Yeah, those are my two questions.
Thanks, Jessica. Thank you, Jessica. Thanks, Jessica. Anybody else? Another question? Anyone else on the panel would like to deal with that question? There are two questions. Why not a regional approach rather than a country or party approach on the issue of Zimbabwe? Tozi, you want to try that? Tozi? In the meantime, let me get to Shepherd. Shepherd, can you come in, Shepherd? Okay, Tozi?
Yeah. No, I was saying Jessica is raising the point about that I raised much earlier, that you see, this was a party-to-party relationship or dialogue, which is really a body-body kind of relationship, because the point I think Eleanor and Militsi made this point earlier, that these are parties that were friends during the liberation struggle. So the anti-colonial struggle, now they remain loyal to each other, protective of each other. It was the desire of the ANC that ZANU-PF remains in power forever, for as long as it lives. In the same way that some leaders in South Africa would say that we will rule until Jesus comes. So regardless of how that government is ruling and how negative its impact is on its citizens, there's the loyalty of the past reigns supreme in terms of these parties of liberation. So but when it comes to SADC, my worry is that I'm not so sure whether it's SADC or AU, whether it has any effect, its intervention will have any effect. Because again, question is, does the peer review, or has the peer review had any impact in changing the way African governments behave? My view is that they don't. So let's come back to what Eleanor was talking about, civil society. Now, civil society, personally, I support civil society very much, but civil society act on issue base. They are not just going to come to Zimbabwe and say, we want ZANU-PF to move out or Mnangagwa to be removed. They're going to pick up on issues. The issue of civil rights, the arrest of people, the suppression of human rights, and the victimization of the press and political opposition, it's an issue that civil society can pick up on. But we also need to identify what are the areas of vulnerability of the government of Zimbabwe. What issues can civil society pick up on so that they mobilize one another around those issues, whether it's regional or South Africa and Zimbabweans in South Africa. At the moment, I don't find that these issues are identified and picked up and highlighted strongly. This violation of human rights issue is a very serious issue, which I think can be picked up by both South Africans and Zimbabweans in South Africa. and other national groups. So yes, I think that's for me how we should look at this thing. That we will find solution of a state to state. I don't see any possibility of getting any positive results out of that.
Well, someone we'll deal with the second question, Jessica, later on. How did they try? Well, the ANC was here for a whole day, met with ZANU-PF, and they say to have put a number of issues on the agenda, and that the dialogue continues from what our understanding. But let me call Shepherd. Shepherd, your hand is up. Shepherd, please come in.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Ipo. I'm just going to raise a few issues, and I'll pose a question. First of all, the issue of dialogue, yes, it's been happening. It's a very good move, but is it an intervention that the Zimbabwean government really cares about? I think it's very important for people to appreciate the nature of the beast that they're dealing with. Do they care? Pressure such as diplomatic pressure actually matters to a government that cares about its reputational standing. The Zimbabwean government, with all its shenanigans, doesn't seem to care. So what sort of pressure, what are the alternatives? What sort of pressure will the government of Zimbabwe actually perceive as pressure? Because with the current dialogues that are going on, they've had these dialogues. They know how to dance around them. They know how to parry the blows that come with those dialogues. So what are the other regional alternatives that can be put on the Zimbabwean government? Thank you.
Tendai, I want to deal with Shepherd's question. Tendai Biti. And then I'll call on to Tony Rila after that. Tendai, what are the alternatives, if any? Unmute yourself, Tendai.
Yeah, you can hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, so Shepherd makes very valid point that you are dealing with the rogue, cantankerous characters that they don't care at all. I mean, every single day, and this is not a metaphor. Every single day there's a predatory headline. Today it was doctors being conscripted. Yesterday they abducted Joanna Mamombe and put her in a mental institution. I mean, every single day. On Monday, we had a report from the NGOs, fantastic report that confirms what we've always been saying, that there's been systematic use of rape as a political weapon, the weaponization of rape, something unprecedented. Even apartheid in its worst form did not do that. So you are dealing with the rogues, you are dealing with the pure, undiluted thugs. So the point that Moleetsi makes, the point that Eleanor makes is fundamental. Number one, we need the agency of Zimbabweans to put pressure on the regime. The Constitution allows us to do that. The Constitution allows us to engage in civil disobedience. Let's boycott their businesses. Let's go on the streets. The kind of thing that in South Africa the UDF did in the fight against apartheid. The kind of thing we tried to do on the 31st of July, 2020. So Zimbabweans must provide the agency. We must confront the beast in the parameters allowed by our constitution. But we need a global advocacy. We need to build a universal movement against this regime. We did it with apartheid. A global advocacy program was built around apartheid, and the Zimbabwe Lives hashtag movement after the 31st of July showed that it can be, done. You had people that under ordinary circumstances would not know where Zimbabwe was on the map, coming to the fore, talking about Zimbabwe, tweeting about Zimbabwe. But as Eleanor says, it has to be coherent. There has to be a coherent demands. 30 years later, 40 years later, we need our own Harare Declaration, maybe call it the Soweto Declaration, on demands for change and reform in Zimbabwe, demands for change in protection of civil liberties in Zimbabwe, you know, a Soweto Charter on protection on human and civil rights in Zimbabwe. The truth of the matter is that we're dealing with a securocratic state, the most complicated, the most sophisticated dictatorship on the African continent. Robert Mugabe went, but it doesn't change anything. Emerson Mnangagwa will go, it will not change anything. You are dealing with a sophisticated regime oiled by the massive resources of Zimbabwe, operating in 8 or so commanding heights of corruption, oiled by incestuous relationship with the Republic of China, Belarus, Russia, and so forth. They've been at it at a long time, and they will not go. They will not reform themselves out of power. We have to be disruptive. We have to find new, innovative ways of confronting them. Otherwise, there will be another 40 years of suffering. We will come and we'll go, and the crisis will remain the same. And that simply is not good enough. So we have to be disruptive, and we have to find convergence. We have to provide the agency, but the international community can and should help us as well.
Thanks, Tendai. Tony Rila, please. Tony.
Okay. Hello. Yeah, I've been listening in fascination. I thought the text today was to start thinking about some outcomes. One of the things that struck me and some of us working here in Zimbabwe is that Zimbabwe actually is a regional problem. By all standards, objective criteria, Zimbabwe is about the 10th most fragile state in the world. Puts us in the category of places like Yemen, Sudan, etc., etc. And the point about fragile states is that they can be redeemed, but they can also fail. They go from fragility to failure. And I think some of us here would argue that Zimbabwe is perilously close to failure. It's isolated economically with no redemption. It's not the sanctions that are the problem. It's the fact that the factors that Tendai talks about, the mass corruption and the money laundering and everything else that goes on, precludes us from getting any foreign direct investment. So in this region, you're faced with a problem of a state that might actually collapse. And when it collapses, it's going to have effects within the region. Within a region in which there's a massively serious insurgency problem developing in Mozambique. So the region is, in a sense, in not dissimilar position to what was happening in the late 1970s. And in those situations, multilateralism is what happens. People get forced to the table. Now, I hear the pessimism about the South African government and the ANC, et cetera, but nonetheless, when countries get to this particular point and they can affect very seriously the countries around them, this is a case for multilateralism. So the way we frame this often is that South Africa has to do something about it, i.e. it has to directly engage. Well, South Africa needs to engage, but it also needs to engage bilaterally with the region, with the international community. That's what brings people to the table in the end. Now, this is not precluding civil society pressure, internal responses, but what I'm trying to suggest here is this is not one of these problems that we think, well, like some other countries, it'll drag on for another 20 years. I think the empirical evidence suggests that Zimbabwe does not have a lot of time. And if we don't do something about it, well, it's going to affect absolutely everyone else. And that's to place Zimbabwe in an emergency case. It's not just a bad country, which it is. It's a bad country heading for worse kinds of situations. And I think that's the key thing that I'm not hearing here, is a sense of urgency about what needs to be done. And I mean internally, regionally, and internationally. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Eleanor, please come in.
I think Max would like to say something.
Oh, welcome, Max.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairperson. A couple of things I'd like to point out. One is that the struggle in Zimbabwe has to be highlighted. We need everybody to know that Zimbabwe is not just a normal state. The conditions in Zimbabwe are worse than in many other parts of Africa. I'm not saying all parts are bad, but what I'm saying is that Zimbabwe has the potential to mobilize its own people, to mobilize international support, also because of the role that Zimbabweans have played in the struggle for freedom. And again, when they need this support, I think the world and all of us would be more than happy to contribute what we can in emphasizing the importance of democracy in Zimbabwe. We tend more often than not simply to take things for granted. For example, the discussions that we've been having today are important. I don't know how many other people outside this meeting would know about what is happening. We need to popularize the struggle in Zimbabwe. We need to popularize the anger of the people about the conditions that they live under. We need to make it a people's struggle as well, not just a struggle of the few who live in Zimbabwe, because we are all affected one way or the other by what happens in any African country. And Zimbabwe is a good example because they have been involved in many of the struggles in Africa themselves. And therefore, everybody would understand when they say, now we need your support in our struggle for democracy, for freedom. It should not be things that are kept secret. There's nothing secret about it. Nothing secret about fighting for freedom. It's quite right. Everybody should do that. So what I'm proposing is maybe a new strategy of how to deal with the issue of Zimbabwe. What needs to be done? Who needs to do what? Let it be an open thing that we are calling on people of the world to join in the struggle for freedom in this part of the world or in Zimbabwe or wherever, so that it is not left to die on its own. Thanks.
Oh, thanks, Max. That's very nice. Refreshing. That's a Max Zulu. Nice, most refreshing to hear that. Onalina? Onalina?
Okay. Yeah, no, I still want to insist that, the solutions going forward must be that the whole region of Southern Africa, civil society, is actually engaged as well, because there's a tendency not to see Zimbabwe as a problem, other than that, there are neighbors who might be just wanting to come and get jobs from people. We need to start dialoguing, and I would be much more comfortable when that dialogue goes beyond the usual suspects of the liberation movement that have built links over time, to start engaging with others. The issue of violence, the issue of, we talk about Zimbabwe as very highly militarized. Remember that Botswana was not terribly far from that in the last 12 years. And I don't know that we have actually come really out of the problem without actually exaggerating the seriousness of the Zimbabwe situation. But we have things in common here that we ought to be dialoguing about on a daily basis, so that it comes to the conscience of every citizen in Southern Africa to put pressure on their governments to start looking at things in a much more holistic manner than it being a Zimbabwe problem. We really have to go beyond the usual channels of communication, where it's ANC people, whether they are ANC as in NGOs dominated by the ruling parties of the former liberation movement. we really ought to broaden the discourse, because as I said earlier, many of these things are problems that affect all of us to different degrees. And so if we have to solve them, let's solve them holistically by engaging everybody in the region. But the Zimbabweans have to be the agents, because we don't want to see a situation where international organizations, particularly Western ones, dominate because they are seen by people to have big purses and therefore come and boss us around. Let it be a Southern African issue, first and foremost, because we are neighbors, because we've been here before during the anti-colonial struggles, during the settler colonial struggles. We've been together before. And so let's begin those dialogues. Let's begin to conscientize people to have many other voices speaking for Zimbabweans, speaking with their governments to say, what are you doing about the level of violence and rape that goes on against women in Zimbabwe? What are you doing about the lack of democratic governance in Zimbabwe? Because at the end of it all, at the end of the day, we are all affected. And therefore, we ought to be able to put pressure on our own governments to say, what are you doing to listen to the voice of Zimbabweans? So that would be, until I see that, I would always feel that our states are captured anyway. And so if dialogues are kept between states and do not involve all citizens, the possibility of finding long-term sustainable resolution of problems will bandage over the problems but never solve the deep-rooted structural issues that give us the nature of the problems that we have in the region.
Thanks, Du. I remembered your nickname, Du. Thanks very much. I have a question now. I have a written question from someone. Tendai, you briefly spoke about how international actors such as the People's Republic of China are providing succor to the ZANU-PF regime. I would like to find out from you and the other panelists and discussants whether engaging the Chinese government, the Communist Party of China, directly could be one of the strategies used in finding new pathways to resolve the Zimbabwe situation. We'll begin with Tendai there, and maybe Tendai, and in answering that question, you could also sum up as we're coming to the end of the program. And then I'll have all panelists and discussants do likewise. Tendai?
Yes, so Zimbabwe has had a very unequal and uneven relationship with the Republic of China. And unfortunately, this relationship has been based on extraction. This relationship has been based on what under ordinary circumstances would call imperialism, neo-colonization. That's what we would call it. The relationship has been very unequal. If you look at our resources, our commodities, let's start with diamonds. Zimbabwe between 2010 and 2016 lost $15 billion worth of diamonds. I used to be Minister of Finance. I ended up sounding like a broken record, complaining about the lack of accountability of Zimbabwe's mining companies vis-a-vis diamonds. But the dominant player in that sector has actually been the Chinese. There's a company called Anjin, which mines in the eastern highlands of Zimbabwe, which used to mine 2 million carats of diamonds per month in partnership with the Zimbabwean military. They were the biggest mine, actually running 7 mines, seven shafts in Marange, but they were not accountable. I could go to other contracts, the construction of roads, the Wange South, the Kariba South power extension. What happened on Kariba is that both Zambia and Zimbabwe put two generators each on the north of the Kariba Dam and the south of the Kariba Dam. Zimbabwe paid like 3 times what Zambia paid for essentially the installation of the same generators. So I could write a book about the uneven and unequal relationship of China. I don't romanticize the same, but I also am aware of the fact that the Chinese government are not immune to the instability in Zimbabwe. And Chinese capital, state capital, is aware that a stable environment, economically, socially, is the best environment for the reproduction of its own capital and its own business and commercial interests in Zimbabwe that are huge anyway. So I think part of the disruption would be dialogue with the Chinese. I know from my time in government that each time that I went to China, and I went on 2 occasions, I would have dialogue and discussions with the Chinese Communist Party, and they were very clear that they wanted stability. One of the things that were viciously against was ZANU's miscued indigenization policy, which they later scrapped. They saw that as predation, that it had nothing to do with the empowerment of the people, and they used to say this openly, even in the presence of President Robert Mugabe. So I think that they should be approached because they share the same concerns. The difference is that they will not carry a megaphone. The difference is that they will not openly criticize any government, but I would support a move that they be engaged. So too the Russians, the Indians, traditional countries that have not had anything to do with our diplomacy. But I need to emphasize that it's a domestic issue, it's a Zimbabwean challenge, it's an African challenge. So the buck stops with us as Zimbabweans and as Africans.
And before you, as your closing remarks, would you say something as to how this South African intervention, South African mediation, South African engagement with the counterparts in Harare, how do you think it can move to a multilateral involving SADC, AU, and indeed, as you have just hinted, even BRICS and the Commonwealth as part of the discussion, as happened before in the history of Zimbabwe? We had Lancaster ourselves. Lancaster was very much mediated and organized by both regional and international factors. Are there possibilities of moving towards a multilateral mediation process, including the selection of a mediation team that goes beyond the region and is more or less multilateral in nature?
Yeah, look, as I said before, number one, ZANU-PF and Emerson Mnangagwa are not interested in dialogue. And for Emerson and his colleagues to borrow from a book that Michelle Wong wrote on Kenya, it's their time to eat. It's their time to eat. In the mind of Emerson, Robert Mugabe was there for 40 years. Let me be there for 40 years. So there's denialism. There's no crisis in Zimbabwe, according to Emerson. So they'll delay, they'll deny, they'll deflect. So it's going to require a great deal of pressure to force ZANU-PF to understand the inevitability of dialogue. That pressure must come from within Zimbabwe. That pressure must come from outside Zimbabwe. The South African state, the political parties, civic society, as Eleanor made the point brilliantly. So that pressure must come. When we go to dialogue, this dialogue needs to be protected. We need to learn from the mistakes of 2007, 2008, and that the dialogue that gave rise to the GNU. The GNU was a missed opportunity. The GNU sustained the crisis in that it elongated the crisis which could have been ended in 2008 when we reached a crescendo at the time. I don't think we are far off from another apex, from another crescendo. So let us learn from the mistakes of 2008. There were things that were done wrong. 2008 essentially became a ceasefire, agreement to stop the violence and the murders that were taking place in 2008. But this time, we want a sustainable solution that deals holistically to the true essence of the crisis in Zimbabwe. That means that there must be international underwriting. There must be international refereeing. SADC must be there. The African Union must be there. If we can find a mechanism of putting in civic society, putting in ordinary citizens as part of watchdogs, we are creative enough. There are smart people in South Africa, in SADC, in Zimbabwe. We can do that. That is possible. Secondly, we must know that the focus must not be on some little power sharing position, as was the case in 2008. Let us focus on reform, reform, reform. And I agree with Tony Rila, the crisis is urgent. I think SADC is going to react when there are dead bodies on the streets in their thousands, but the crisis is urgent, trust me. So once we agree on those reforms, we need the implementation mechanism. Last time we erred by allowing those that were that needed reform to become the implementers. I think that was a problem. Let's create an implementation mechanism that will ensure that those that are implementing has no stake in the fight that will follow tomorrow, which is the fight for a free and fair democratic election. So a carefully structured national transitional authority that focuses on delivery, a performance with the targets and Gantt charts, in my respectful opinion, will be very, very key. Then lastly, let's go to an election. Ultimately, the people of Zimbabwe must be allowed to choose the leadership that they want, but on a flattened state, on an equal state, in which the grip of the securocratic force and the nostalgia and the grip of the liberation movement, the exhausted liberation movement, has been loosened. Without that, we are going nowhere. I think that we are not far off to pushing ZANU-PF to accept that there has to be genuine, dialogue. I know that certain key sectors of the state, certain key sections of the military are for this genuine dialogue, because we have 4 generations that have paid a premium of the Zimbabwean crisis. We have 4 generations of children that don't know the inside of a workplace, that think that it's normal to sell vegetables at the Rangin bus station in Bulawayo. It's normal to sell foreign currency in 4th Street. So we need to resolve this as a measure of urgency. Nampla Katesi, it is urgent, it is critical.
Thanks, Tendai. Odolina, same question. The possibilities for multilateral and the kind of issues that Tendai raised on need for global advocacy. Your last words, Odolina. Now call on Moletsi, Eleanor, and Tozi, in that order. Odolina. Your last words. Unmute yourself.
All right. Yeah.
Okay.
He's made a very, very important point that we miss in our focus on dialogue and multiple engagements. The issue of it's time to eat. Our governments are the tables on which food is set, that people want to own that table so that they eat. So how is it possible to have people eating other than through state power? Is it possible that when we dialogue with countries like China and others, that the state ceases to be the place that people want to take over so that they can eat? Because it seems to me that we can dialogue and still come to the fact that it's a change, people just change chairs, but essentially it is the state that people want to take over so that they can enrich themselves. We can dialogue, we can have China putting pressure, but where is the food that people want to eat? Can we have multiple tables in the process of that dialoguing so that it's not the one state that has to be captured? Yes, I would go for any dialogue that will involve as many people as possible, but I would also like to see us offering multiple sources of tables where people can go and eat instead of the state as the sole area that everybody wants to capture.
Thanks, Olena. Thanks very much. It was good to see you again. Molesi, your last words for today, I mean.
My last word for today. Really, I want to endorse the call that there should be a civil society forum or conference or engagement, obviously with Zimbabweans playing a leadership role there, to map out the demands that will go to BRICS, that will go to the AU, that will go to the United Nations, and all those places. The second thing is we also have to have a pressure. It's not enough just to talk. I remember a meeting with the late Morgan Tsvangirai and some of us, including COSATU, where we asked Morgan, do you want us to shut down Beitbridge in order to show pressure to that we are serious, to show both the South African government and the Zimbabwean government that we mean business? Because a delegation of COSATU had been sent to Zimbabwe and it was deported from Zimbabwe. So we asked, do you want us to close down Beitbridge? And he said no. So there has to be a program of action that the Zimbabweans can live with. But there has to be a program of action. If all we are going to be doing is passing resolutions, well, we will never get anywhere. The ZANU-PF, this has been emphasized today over and again. ZANU-PF is not listening, is not interested in listening. They think they need another 4 years for Mnangagwa to be eating, and that is their agenda. But we have to put pressure on them. The last point I wish to point out is that Zimbabwe is becoming more and more economically marginalized. And that's not good for the people of Zimbabwe. It's not good for the economy of Zimbabwe. At the end of this year, the bridge on Kazangula that bypasses Zimbabwe and links Botswana to Zambia is going to be opened, which means that Zimbabwe will cease being the transit route for the SADC community economic relations. This is something that needs to be managed properly. I'm not saying the bridge shouldn't have been built, but the bridge can quickly destroy the Zimbabwean economy or marginalize the Zimbabwean economy, and that's not. We want more integration of Zimbabwe because that gives us as civil society and the people of Zimbabwe, gives them leverage over the ZANU-PF regime and over the SADC government. So these are why I think the suggestion that civil society must get together and come up with a common, not just program of what we're demanding, but a program of action as well.
Thanks, Molesi. It's good to see you again. Thanks very much. Hope we see you again. Huh? Eleanor, your last words?
Yes, I agree. I mean, I'm quite cynical about dialogue between politicians, but I recognize that it must happen, and that the thing that helps make it happen is pressure. So I think that civil society focus and pressure on very specific things. And there are things which do succeed. For example, Hopewell Chinono wouldn't be released today if there wasn't pressure. The fact that Tsitsi Dangarembwa won actually was shortlisted for the Booker Prize 2 days before she was arrested did help in the fact that she was released sooner rather than later. So I think the support for Zimbabweans who are struggling, confronting this regime, while all the dialogue and mediation and whatnot is going on, some of us have to focus on supporting people and putting pressure. And there have been things which have worked in the past, and I think we need to upscale those things. For example, the abductions. I would suggest to you, Ibo, that this becomes a subject of a specific dialogue where people across the region are invited and where we actually have a strategy specifically on these abductions, because we must stop them happening. We say people's power and people must struggle. In order to help them in that, in the process of struggle, we have to put pressure on this regime to ensure that the cost of human rights violations are driven up as high as possible.
Thanks, Eleanor. Your point is taken. That's the next dialogue. You'll be back here in 2 weeks' time. Thanks very much. Tozi, are you still there? Last but not least.
Well, I agree with everybody who has said that we need some form of dialogue. That dialogue, in my view, should be guided by the people of Zimbabwe. They must give us the agenda of what we are supposed to do. They must lead. And whether those people of Zimbabwe are inside and outside or outside of Zimbabwe, then mobilize the region around the issues that we want to campaign. Like the example that Eleanor is making, we've got to identify specific issues around which we should mobilize the civil society organizations. Unfortunately, outsiders can't tell Zimbabweans what to do. I'm like others, I am also cynical about leaving this on a state-to-state basis. You can't avoid the state participating. At some point, the states are going to have to participate. But there has to be pressure on those states to marshal them towards the objectives that we have identified or the people of Zimbabwe have identified. So give us an agenda. Let us all work together, sit down and work out that agenda that we can all buy into as the region, as the countries of the region, and South Africa has a critical role to play because a lot of Zimbabweans are there and we must work with them to create this viable civil society organization. Because if Zimbabweans who are in South Africa are pushed back to South Africa, to Zimbabwe without jobs, they're in a state of crisis. We will too be in a crisis. We don't want a Zimbabwe economy collapsing if we can, but of course we want that to happen within a democratic state that respects human rights for its citizens. Thank you.
Thanks, Tozi. Thanks, and again, very good. Nice to see you again. Thanks to you all to Tozi, Tendai, Eleanor, Moletsi, and Onelina. Thank you very much. There's no need to summarize. I think all of you, the 4 of you, have summarized this very well, except to highlight again the points made by BT, Tendai BT, namely the need, one, the agency of Zimbabweans, the national situation. To what extent, as the state began to acknowledge that the house is on fire, it appears it has not yet acknowledged that, and it's a pity that it has to require much more action on the part of the Zimbabwean population in terms of protest, peaceful, in terms of constitutional, staying within the constitutional ambit of the law, in terms of putting pressure on the state. The second, of course, that the global agency, global advocacy must continue. And I think we, through such fora as we have been able to sustain a level of engagement with the international community the region. But certainly tonight, I think we have had very strong voices from persons who have been involved with civic society, especially Tozi, Eleanor, Moletsi, Onolina herself, but also Tendai Biti, who has been on the cutting edge of the struggle in Zimbabwe. So on that note, I would like to say that, well, we have looked at the issue of mediation. It appears there isn't much of mediation taking place. There appears to be engagement. We are still far from putting in place precisely what it is that should take place between now and what we are calling a comprehensive national settlement in Zimbabwe. What kind of mediation should it take? The need for multilateralism, the need to involve SADC, for South Africa to involve SADC, AU, and indeed even BRICS and the international community in ensuring that we get to a systematic and programmed discussion on the crisis in Zimbabwe. So thank you. We'll meet you again in 2 weeks' time when, as recommended by Eleanor, we look at the issue of violence, abductions, rape that has become a menace, a scourge in Zimbabwe. Thank you and good night.